Hey guys, and welcome back to the only series out there that combines the stories of Magic the Gathering with the physical cards you can win. I'm Simon, and this is Friday Night Lore. With the upcoming release of Battle For Zendikar, I think it's high time we start looking at some of the major players who will be involved in that storyline. So for this week's FNL, let's finally look at the mysterious figure known as the Lithomancer and discover how this unique core planeswalker could impact the fate of Zendikar. Firstly, the Lithomancer is a core named Nahiri. The cores are a race of humanoids who are native to the plane of Zendikar. They typically have white or bluish skin and live a very nomadic life. The core are a proud race who travel light and often, making tough journeys to different shrines all across the plane. Nahiri is one of the core's mystics, who specializes in lithomancy, which is the power to manipulate earth, stone, and the metals found in rocks. In her tribe, these mystics are known as stone forgers, who traditionally forge weapons from nothing more than bare rocks or boulders. Not much is known about her past or how her spark initially ignited, but we do know that she is definitely a planeswalker. The first reference we have of Nahiri takes place about 6,000 years ago on an unknown plane that she traveled to. She was on this plane with the vampire Sauron Markov, a fellow planeswalker and uneasy ally. They had teamed up to track and ultimately defeat a group of colorless beings known as the Eldrazi. These ancient otherworldly figures consumed pure mana as their food source, causing devastation to whichever plane they just happened to stumble upon through the blind eternities. Both Nahiri and Sauron had similar goals, to end the Eldrazi, but they had completely different motivations. Nahiri was a protector at heart, always looking to save lives no matter who they may be. She looked at making small gains against her enemies, protecting individual lives as often as she could. While Sauron, on the other hand, had a much more selfish motive. He only cared about his own plane of Innistrad, and even then he only cared because he had put so much effort and energy into making it his own. He only wanted to stop the Eldrazi before they inevitably came to Innistrad. While on this unnamed plane together, they traveled with a group of refugees who had been misplaced due to the destruction of the Eldrazi. They knew the creatures were right on their heels, and Sauron sensed that the plane had already been lost. No amount of effort seemed to push these monsters back, and so Sauron was about ready to leave this plane to its fate and try again another day. This was of course out of the question for the naturally protective Nahiri, who armed the refugees with stone-forged weapons and prepared to fight to the death with them. Sauron amused this notion to prove a point. As the spawns of the Eldrazi god known as Ulamog raided the campsite, they saw Death's shadow loom over them. It was Ulamog, consuming, feeding on the very men of the plane. The earth beneath them turned to dust and the flaky surface began to give way. A crack had formed in the soil. It grew larger. It wasn't a mere quake, but rather a split down the very center of the plane itself. Sauron knew he had proved his point. It was over, and there was nothing more the two of them could do for this world. Both managed to planeswalk away right before the world met its fate. Previously, they had decided to meet back at Nahiri's home plane of Zendikar should they fail. Zendikar was under her strict protection, and she could think of no other place to meet. Sauron didn't want to meet on Innistrad, naturally fearing the Eldrazi would follow them there. As they met with each other on the foot of the mountain Akum, they quietly reflected on the events which just transpired. Nahiri was overcome with grief for the loss of the plane and all of its life, while Sauron was more worried about how unstoppable the Eldrazi seemed to be. The tension of the speechless conversation between them became thick, but was eventually broken by a feeling that something was coming from the blind eternities, something big. Nahiri feared that the Eldrazi had in fact followed them to Zendikar, but Sauron assured her that while the beam was big, it wasn't that big. With that statement, a shining light of blue and white glimmering mana broke through the clouds and a huge, ethereal dragon appeared. It was the spirit dragon Ugin, who was formally introduced to Nahiri by Sauron. Sauron and Ugin had known each other for many years before this, working together on occasion. Ugin stated that they all shared a similar problem, a problem the entire multiverse shared: the Eldrazi. Nahiri was skeptical at first, suspicious of Ugin, who had watched them fight and fail on the doomed plane not long ago. She could not believe that this dragon wanted to save lives, yet did not interfere when he saw a plane being destroyed. Ugin assured Nahiri that he was watching their battle and knew the plane was a goner, but decided to take the time to gather information about their enemy. Agreeing that Sauron in fact knew a great deal about the Eldrazi, she approved of the formation of the Three. The Three is a term used for the original grouping of Ugin, Sauron, and Nahiri for the sole purpose of stopping the Eldrazi. With the Three now formed, they began to discuss their battle plan. Sauron wanted to outright kill the Eldrazi, to which Nahiri agreed. Ugin shared that may not be possible because of their anatomy. The Eldrazi are creatures of the Blind Eternity, and so they don't have physical forms. What the pair faced on the doomed plane were merely physical avatars. If they destroyed the avatars, which is difficult in its own right, they would merely just reappear in the Blind Eternities. To the same notion, they cannot defeat them in the Blind Eternities because it's a place where no physical creature can survive for any real amount of time. The only real option was to imprison all three of the Eldrazi gods, but first they needed a plane which would serve as their jail. It had to be large, with sufficient mana sources to bait the Eldrazi in. It became clear that the only real option was Nahiri's plane of Zendikar. Ugin stated that if they succeeded, Zendikar would be damaged but stable. But if they failed, it would surely be consumed. Nahiri initially said no to this proposal, not willing to risk putting her plane and her people at risk for a mere chance. But Ugin was able to convince Nahiri that her plane had the ability to withstand this force and serve as the protector for the entire multiverse. Nahiri, being a Lithomancer, could feel the very soil of Zendikar. It was strong. Her plane could survive these titans. Zendikar would be their jail, and Nahiri alone would be their jailer for all time. With the plan coming in motion, Ugin began to distribute their individual duties, which would come together as a single objective. Nahiri was told to construct large stone hedrons along special mana ley lines found across the plane. These hedrons magnified the mana found there and channeled it into a physical force. The hedrons also served as the Eldrazi's bait, sending pulses of mana into the Blind Eternities, catching the senses of the Titans and drawing them close. When the Eldrazi finally appeared, it was like the physical embodiment of destruction itself was descending upon them. The three enormous Eldrazi gods began to chase towards the focal point of mana, a central hedron in the heart of a coombe called the Eye of Ugin. Nahiri enjoyed this name quite a bit. She saw it as a message to Ugin. Remember, dragon, this was your idea. As the gods were in place, Ugin, Sauron, and Nahiri all pulled as much power as they could into the Eye of Ugin. The plane itself quivered with effort to contain the Eldrazi. Untold destruction came to the land, but it eventually settled. The deed had been done. The three successfully trapped the Eldrazi in their manifested forms, sparing the plane of Zendikar and the multiverse as a whole. Eventually, Ugin and Sauron would part ways with Nahiri, who promised to never leave Zendikar and watch over the prison for all time. Should anything loosen the Eldrazi's bonds, she would summon Ugin and Sauron back to Zendikar to fix and reinforce the locks. For 5,000 years, Nahiri would watch over Zendikar and protect it from all outside threats while also protecting it from the monsters, which dwell just beneath its surface. The most famous threat to her world post-Eldrazi came in the form of the conqueror known as Nixilis. You can find more on this event in my lore video on the character here, but basically, Nahiri dealt with this guy like a complete badass. With relative peace befalling her plane, Nahiri went about living her own life with her people. She made friends, taught pupils lithomancy, fell in love a number of different times. She told tales of the great Eldrazi gods who should never be forgotten and should forever be feared. But, since she was ageless, she was cursed to roam life, losing everyone she loved eventually to death. This took a great toll on the planeswalker. She began to wonder what meaning life held, if any. Time passed like it wasn't even a real thing, and this depression caused her to isolate herself in the mountain of a coombe. Fearing her loneliness would cause her to lose sight of her goal to protect Zendikar, she encased herself in a hedron cocoon. She figured she had no other place to go in the entire plane, so she decided to sit there and wait, and just wait. Eventually something did move the earth of Zendikar. It caused the Coombe itself to shake violently in protest. She could sense it. The Eldrazi had found a crack in their prison and were escaping. She awoke to the sight of thousands of Eldrazi spawns emerging from the foot of a Coombe. As she stared at this force of nature, she pondered. What does she care if these creatures destroy her plane? Lives don't matter, time doesn't matter, nothing matters at all in the end. But the feet of the spawnlings dug into the soil of Zendikar. The soil Nahiri was so attuned to, it caused her a great pain and discomfort. This pain stirred her to act and protect the plane she had sworn her life to. Nahiri made her way to the Eye of Ugin, at which she used her power to send out a message to Sauron and Ugin, requesting aid in fixing the magical seal of the prison. With the summon performed, she went back to her Hedron cocoon to wait for her allies. As she sat, she could feel the Eldrazi swarming her lands. She made a note to track the movements of the larger Eldrazi figures. She was happy to see that the Titans themselves were unable to leave the prison so far, only allowing extensions of their beings to be released. Her mind wandered for what felt like seconds to her, and she could feel the footsteps of armies forming to defend themselves against the Eldrazi. Another second passed, and she could feel Zendikar itself crying out in pain as the monsters drained its very mana. She had no idea how much time actually passed as she sat there waiting. She was in fact sitting and waiting for a significant amount of time, an amount of time which allowed the Eldrazi to spread throughout Zendikar. And still, Sauron and Ugin did not show. Nahiri wanted to see her friend Sauron again, the only other being who may have experienced the pain her longevity had caused her. She wanted to see how he was able to deal with all this pain, but that had to be pushed out of her mind for now. She had a bigger problem to deal with. She appeared on top of a mountain. Below her was a valley filled with Eldrazi spawn. Seeing these creatures as nothing more than insects, she placed her foot on the side of the mountain, causing a cascade of boulders to crush the horde of monsters. Lower in the valley was the core city of Ondu, a city which Nahiri had visited early on in her guardianship. Now it laid abandoned and swarming with Eldrazi. With a simple gesture, she closed the canyon and swallowed the Eldrazi up, leaving the city clear for her to explore. She spied a strange stone building near the center of the city. Piquing her interest, she entered. Just inside this building was a large stone carving of herself, obviously made by one of her lithomancy pupils long ago. But something else caught her eye, another figure depicted in stone behind her. She looked closely but couldn't believe her eyes. It was what appeared to be a crude outlining of the Eldrazi god known as Kozilek. But it wasn't the exact image of the Titan, rather it was morphed into some weird hybrid between the god and a core male. No matter its representation, it shared the physical characteristics of the Eldrazi. Below the images was an engraving, a name to this artful abomination. The subject stated, Nahiri the Prophet. She turned away in disgust, but she only had herself to blame. After all, it was her who described the Eldrazi as gods, and apparently that is what the core people remembered them as. She wanted to search out more Eldrazi to smush as a means to vent her newfound anger and rage, feelings she had not felt in centuries. But first, she had to find whatever was causing the disruption of her ley lines and her hedrons. As she went back to the mountain, she saw a small stone structure which appeared to be a rugged shelter. She was cautious as she approached, for in the distance she could make out shadowy figures moving about the grounds. The figures started advancing on Nahiri. With a single gesture, she pulled a molten hot sword from a rock near her and charged. As she met them in combat, they appeared to be merely humans, but their ashy skin, lifeless eyes, and unfamiliar clothing reminded her of someone else she knew, Sauron. When she was close enough to see their teeth, her suspicions were confirmed. They were vampires. While vampires are now commonplace on Zendikar, there were none native to this plane at this time. This finding shocked and confused Nahiri. After dispatching the creatures, Nahiri quickly made her way into the structure they were protecting. There, she found another idol statue dedicated to their Eldrazi gods, this time in the form of Ulamog. In mere moments, she was able to break down the statue, which angered the other vampires and caused them to attack, unsuccessfully. She didn't understand what rituals the vampires had performed on this site, but apparently it was enough to screw the ley lines ever so slightly to allow the broodlings to escape. She then went on with the painstaking work of reforming a Hedron from scratch. It was difficult work without the assistance of the spirit dragon Ugin. As she worked to fix the ley line, she was attacked by numerous spawns of the Eldrazi. Each time a wave would descend upon her, she would force up a barrier made of pure stone. Once the endless drones had broken through enough of the shield, she would shatter it, killing the Eldrazi and instantly raising a fresh barrier to replace it. This repeated several times until the Hedron was repaired. Nahiri listened to the ground carefully. She could feel the movements of the Eldrazi slow and eventually stop. The prison had been repaired, and thus, a major escape had been avoided. Nahiri reflected on these events. Perhaps the emergence from her Hedron cocoon was in fact her return to life, a rebirth. She was now finished contemplating on the meaning of things and was ready to go back to actually living. Yet a question still lingered. What's happened to her oldest friend, Sauron? Has he forgotten about her, Zendikar, and the Eldrazi? What's he been doing all these years, and is he even still alive? Why didn't he come to her aid? These were all questions Nahiri had to find answers to, and with that, she left Zendikar to find Sauron Markov. So, there you go guys, the full story of Nahiri the Lithomancer. Obviously, she'll play a huge role in the upcoming Battle for Zendikar, and it's important that we understand her lore moving forward. That being said, there's still many holes involving her story. Mainly, it involves the timeline of Zendikar and when events took place. Like, when did vampires first appear and why? Where was Sauron during this little breach? Did Nahiri and Sauron ever find each other, and if so, then why didn't Nahiri help Sauron during the major escape in Rise of the Eldrazi? Near the end of Dragons of Tarkir, Sauron Markov and a newly revived Ugin are discussing the Eldrazi escape. Ugin asks Sauron if he knew where Nahiri was, and Sauron kind of looks at the dragon awkwardly, like he knows what happened to Nahiri but is reluctant to say. Obviously these two planeswalkers have a history together which extends past Nahiri's current lore. This is of course something I hope gets expanded upon as we progress towards Battle for Zendikar's release. Well, in any case, what do you guys think about this stone forging planeswalker? What role do you believe she'll have in Zendikar's future? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And with that comment, you can enter for your chance to win your very own copy of the stone forging planeswalker herself. Yep, leave your comment below, and at the end of the week, I'll use a random number generator to select a winner and announce them at the end of next week's FNL. So make sure you stay tuned to see if you've won. With this week's Friday Night Lore all wrapped up, let's reveal the winner of last week's giveaway. On the previous FNL, I went over the story of Nissa Ravain, including her new Magic Origins lore, and so the winner was set to receive a copy of the Nissa Ravain Planeswalker card. And the winner of last week's FNL and new owner of this Nissa Ravain card is Kaden Morgan. Congratulations to the YouTube user Kaden Morgan. Please check your private messages on YouTube. There, you should find a message from me with all the info I need to send you this card. If you can't find the message, check your spam, it sometimes ends up there. Remember, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way in helping me provide future content. Another way you could support this channel is by visiting my sponsor at abugames.com. ABU Games is one of the leading online providers of all things Magic, from booster boxes to singles. This week's FNL and all my giveaways are brought to you directly by ABU Games, and I really suggest you checking them out. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.